Well, hey there, and welcome back to my channel Postal Past. In today's video, I'm going to look at another one of your required topics for the AP European History curriculum, namely the Warsaw Pact. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, then let's get to it. Okay, so in order to understand what the Warsaw Pact was and why it matters, you got to have some context from the end of World War II and the beginning of what we call the Cold War. If you want a review of that topic, then click right here in the card, and that'll help you out. But in the meantime, let's just dive right into this thing. So here's what you need to know about the Warsaw Pact. First of all, it was created in response to the formation of NATO. And if you don't remember what NATO is, well, here's a quick review. In 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, also known as NATO, was formed as an alliance between the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and several Western European nations. Now, this was a defensive alliance aimed at protecting Western Europe from the Soviet Union and its allies. The creation of NATO was a major step towards formalizing the division of Europe into two opposing camps, which was a key feature of the Cold War. Now, why did the Soviets feel compelled to respond to NATO by creating their own alliance? Well, let me tell you, they were pretty paranoid about stuff. And in this case, their paranoia was actually justified. Like, if you were the Soviet Union, would you feel comfortable with the United States having a bunch of military bases in your own backyard? Probably not. And to make matters worse, the US had nukes. So what did the Soviet Union do? They made their own alliance, the Warsaw Pact. In 1955, the Warsaw Pact, also known as the Treaty of Warsaw, was created by the Soviet Union and its satellite states in Eastern Europe. It was an alliance formed in response to NATO and was designed to counter what the Soviets saw as the growing threat of Western imperialism and colonialism. The pact solidified the division of Europe into two opposing military alliances, NATO in the West and the Warsaw Pact in the East. Now, who were the members of the Warsaw Pact? As I said, it was created by the Soviet Union and included its satellite states in Eastern Europe, namely Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. Albania initially joined the pact in 1954, but withdrew in 1968 after growing closer to China. Yugoslavia also broke away from the pact in 1948 after Tito fell out of favor with Stalin. Nevertheless, those six nations, along with the Soviet Union, are considered the core members of the Warsaw Pact. Okay, now you need to know what the structure of the Warsaw Pact was like. The Warsaw Pact was a military alliance, and as such, it had a military command structure headed by a Secretary General. That position was always held by a Soviet general, as was the position of Chairman of the Council of Ministers. All decisions had to be approved by the Soviet leader. In addition to these military structures, each member country also maintained a high degree of autonomy within the alliance. Although the Soviet Union had a significant amount of influence over their foreign policy, each nation could still pursue its own economic and social policies. For example, Yugoslavia under Tito pursued a unique brand of communism that was far more lenient than what the Soviet Union was doing. All right. Now let's talk about some of the key events that involve the Warsaw Pact. First up is Hungary, 1956. So in October of 1956, students and intellectuals in Hungary began to protest against the communist government's tight control over Hungarian culture and its refusal to permit any meaningful reforms. These protests quickly escalated into a full-blown revolution, and soon the entire country was in an uproar. The Hungarians wanted to pull out of the Warsaw Pact and create a neutralist state, and for a while it looked like the Soviet Union might just let them. However, after the new reform-minded leader of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, had consultations with his advisors, he decided to crack down on the Hungarians. Soviet tanks rolled into Budapest and crushed the revolution, killing hundreds of Hungarians and detaining thousands more. This event showed the other nations of the Warsaw Pact that the Soviet Union was not going to tolerate any dissent within its sphere of influence. Next, we have Czechoslovakia in 1968. Which was known as the Prague Spring. By the mid-1960s, the Soviet Union was becoming increasingly alarmed by the growing reform movement within Czechoslovakia. Under the leadership of Alexander Dubček, the Czechs began to introduce reforms that allowed for greater political and economic freedom. Again, the Czechs wanted to leave the Warsaw Pact and become neutral. Once again, Soviet tanks rolled into the country, ending the Prague Spring and crushing the reform movement. Okay, now why does the Warsaw Pact matter? Well, the significance of the Warsaw Pact lies in its role as a key element of the Cold War order in Europe. The creation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955 marked a significant escalation in the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. It formalized the division of Europe into two opposing military alliances and contributed to the development of mutually assured destruction as a means of maintaining peace during the Cold War. The Warsaw Pact also played a key role in shaping the foreign policies of the Eastern European nations, which were effectively transformed into Soviet satellites. Each member nation had to maintain a large military force and was heavily dependent on the Soviet Union for economic and political support. The Warsaw Pact also limited the ability of Eastern European nations to pursue independent foreign policies, and they were expected to support the Soviet Union's position on all international issues. Finally, the collapse of the Warsaw Pact in 1991 was a significant event in the end of the Cold War and the subsequent transformation of Europe. You can learn more about that through additional resources. All right, I hope that helped. If you want to give me a like or subscribe or both to my channel Postal Past, I'm not really picky, then yeah, that would be great. I shall see you in the next one.